Well, New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo and state legislators are currently working on passing the state budget, criminal justice reform, immigration, and much more. Here now talking about the going-ons in Albany, Assemblyman Luis Sepulveda, who joins us now to talk a little bit about what is happening. And first of all, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And I was saying earlier, you still look like you're 25 years old when I met you 20 years ago.
Oh, that means the questions are going to be soft today. You got it, man. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And you look the same as well. Listen, let's talk about this here. Obviously, we talked about budget. We talked about what's going on in Washington, D.C.,
Yes.
but really talking closer to home when it comes to the state budget. A lot of talk is still going on, particularly about a couple of key areas. Let's talk about, first of all, do you think that we're going to get an on-time budget passed?
You know, that's always a crapshoot. We don't know. There are a lot of outside forces or occurrences that may impede an on-time budget. For example, we now have that John DeFrancisco, who's a Republican, may probably be running. He's a front runner now, been endorsed by Flanagan, who's the leader of the Senate. So his run for the governorship may cause some problems because now you have to inject, I mean, the budgets are politicized enough, but now you're going to inject even another factor in terms of politics to see what kind of on-time budget, what sort of budget the Republicans are going to want to push for an election year. So it's complex. There's a lot of pieces that have to fall into place. So I'm not going to say yes, but I'm not going to say no.
Looking at the budget, there's a lot of things that are going on. There are a lot of things that we can take a very particular look at. I want to talk a little bit closer to home, literally and figuratively. There's some things that you have some challenges with.
Well, yes. You know, we have the the caucus of Black, Puerto Rican, Latino, Hispanic, Asian caucus, which is really, it's an organization made up of elected officials of color, basically, that represent communities of color. We have a good number, about close to 70, 65 to 70 of us. And what we do is we try to push policies that are important to the communities of color. You know, we try to get additional budget, money for education, for social service programs. And we have now modified the criminal justice system on the Raise the Age. We're going to have it's a better system now. It still needs work, but a lot of these juveniles that have committed offenses will be taken away from the adult system. It's much more humane, and it certainly provides a path for changes for some of these young men and women that are incarcerated at a young age. As part of Raise the Age, a concept called Close to Home, where these young men and women are literally housed, rather than in prisons, they're going to be housed in facilities that are secured, run by docs, some level of NYPD, correctional. You know, there's a system in place so these kids don't become a danger to the community in such a situation. But having these kids close to home, the empirical data certainly has demonstrated that these kids have a better chance of getting into the general population, of going to school, getting high school diplomas. It's been success. You see other models that are similar that have been very successful. Unfortunately, a lot of these kids that are, these youths that are in the system, that have gone through the criminal justice system are young Black and Latino men, mostly, some females, but mostly are kids in our communities. And so this program that has been a model that's been so successful in other areas is now caught in the crossfire between the mayor and the governor. As part of the budget, the governor in the executive budget didn't allocate another $200 million that I believe is necessary, and I think that's what people a lot more in the know are saying, you need to fund this. The city certainly says that. So the governor did not include the $200 million to fund Close to Home. So you have a wonderful concept, but we all know without the funding, you're not going to get the concept. And so we as a caucus, myself as a legislator that represents a majority, overwhelming majority of communities of color, we want to make sure that the $200 million is allocated. The mayor is saying that that the city shouldn't have to pay for something that the state's responsible for, because at the end of the day, the $200 million will be coming from, our tax base, our revenues. So what the governor's position is almost akin to city pays for it. What the city is, state pays for correctional systems throughout the state of New York. But at the end of the day, if we cannot come together, you're not going to have the $200 million, and that jeopardizes a program that I want to work with. I'm in the corrections committee for the New York State Assembly. And as a practicing attorney and all that stuff, I understand that a lot of these kids just need a little push, and anything that it increase or decrease recidivism that will get these kids back in the general population to become successful, productive citizens is something that we're going to fight for.
I can't just leave it there, but let me talk a little bit about bail reform too as well.
Yes.
We know that that's on the table. Where do we see this going?
Well, again, that's one of the things that under the criminal justice system that I believe will be an attempt at a bargaining chip from the Republicans. Essentially, we find for-profit bail repulsive. We find that it's almost inhumane, but certainly unjustifiable that where the kind of justice you receive is dependent on the zip code where you come from. So, if an African American or Latino male, or someone who's poor, as opposed to a general population, usually white, young white men, who come from families with more means, you commit the same offense because one doesn't have the money for bail. He gets to go, or she gets to go into the criminal justice system, into a jail, whereas the white counterpart who comes from wealthier parents go home. That's what happened with Khalif Browder, and we all know what happened with him. They just needed that money. He didn't have it, and for several months, he was mental breakdown, which ultimately led to his death. So there's some crimes, essentially there's some violent crimes that you should make it difficult for someone to get out if they're accused, but there's some crimes, some misdemeanors where
low-level offenses,
very low-level offenses that our kids should not be subjected to the criminal justice system in the way that they are for such a long, protracted period, because we're not even going to discuss the litigation involved and the games that are played and so forth, and discovery demands, which is another part of the criminal justice reform. That is now has a movement to change, the information that the DA has to provide to defending attorneys. But, we want to decrease the amount of interaction that our kids have with the criminal justice system. And so, let's not politicize this issue. And there's some things that are sacred, and that's certainly one of them.
How do we see things going out of Albany over the next couple of weeks and going into the month?
Well, there's so many different things that are happening now, so many little dynamics, little pieces, struggles, fights for our communities. We have to fight harder this year than we ever had because there's an impending budget that's going to have a $4 billion deficit. We don't know what's happening in Washington, D.C. and their hostility towards communities of color. Today there was a report about inflation peaking a little too fast for the liking of most economists. And when you have inflation, you're going to have to pay more for your mortgage, food, and so forth. So now we have this uncertainty about where inflation is going. You have a tax cap, property tax cap the governor has imposed for regular programs that people need, social service programs, but doesn't apply to capital. So you can build billions of dollars of bridges. The 2% tax cap on property values doesn't impact what you can build, but it certainly will take money away from the social service programs and networks that our communities rely on. And so, it's going to be a fight that we as a community are going to have, but we're going to have to fight harder than ever.
All right. Assemblyman Luis Sepulveda,
Thank you
so much for coming and sharing. Good to see you as always.
Always good.
All righty then. He's our guest from the 87th Assembly District. Listen, we invite you to stay connected to him as we continue to talk more coming out of Albany and also out of Washington, D.C. We'll see how all of this plays out. What goes on in Washington will certainly have an effect here, and what goes on in New York State will bring you up to speed with all of that here on Open as well as on BronxNet Television. Taking a quick break, we'll be back with more show. We ask that you stay with us. We're coming right back right after this.